Hello, friends and neighbors. Let's talk about commitment and dedication.
Welcome to A Word for Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us. Each Wednesday, you will find Boggs Family Ministries is here with our host, Davy Boggs. Having you along with us is a wonderful addition. Now, let's enjoy together A Word for Wednesday.
Thank you, Brother Devin, and thank you for joining us on A Word for Wednesday. It is so good to have you along. I'm recording today, obviously, in the bus. The weather is very hot in the south, and I'm parked just a couple hundred feet from a very busy 4-lane road, so outside was not an option. We may even get some of that noise in here. I do have the air near me turned off for a few moments, so you're not bothered by that. I'm not bothered by that. I do have one air running about 20 feet away from me. Hopefully, the sound is okay. Let's talk about commitment and dedication. Making a commitment, being dedicated to something, is a very honorable pursuit. In America, we have always honored commitment, even when the commitment was to a cause opposite our own. That's why our political leaders have normally been able to cross the aisle, shake hands, and work with someone who completely disagreed with them because it was an honest commitment on their part. We've been able to cross the court, across the field, shake hands with the opponent in a sporting contest because they're on the opposite team, but we understand they have made a commitment similar to ours, and we honor that commitment. In sports, that's called good sportsmanship. I don't know what we call it in society other than something that's lacking today. We ought to honor commitment and dedication. It is a fine Christian principle. A Christian who is not committed, who is not dedicated, not committed to Christ, dedicated to working and living for Christ and His kingdom, is not a very good Christian at all. Someone may say, well, that's a little judgmental. Yes, judgment is not totally forbidden. We ought to judge a righteous judgment. But a Christian who's not committed to Christ, his commitment lies somewhere else, is not really a Christian, not a dedicated Christian. Commitment and dedication in our lives, in our Christianity, in every area that we walk, is a wonderful thing. It's a needful thing. Have you made a commitment? All through Christian history, we see this. And in American history, we see this. People who made a commitment to the early days of America, to governing by the Constitution, to being free, they weren't always right. In fact, they made some glaring mistakes. They left out groups of people who were essential to building America, and they didn't grant freedom to them in the early days because they had a horrible blind spot. But does that mean those men were completely wrong? No. I can criticize them in some areas and honor their commitment in other areas. Oh, I wish that I could live my life without any blind spots. It will probably be years after I'm gone, if anybody thinks of me. It will be years after I'm gone. Someone will say, Davy had a blind spot. Maybe you can see that blind spot right now. I don't want to live my life with a blind spot. I want to see things clearly. But until I can see things clearly, I'm not just going to waver in uncommitment. I am committed to Christ. I am dedicated to His work. I want to do His will. I want to live my best for Him. I want to fulfill my life biblically to the very best of my ability. Do you see why we honor commitment and dedication? At the founding of our country, it was a very critical time. It was a very troubled time. And people in America, in the 13 colonies, when what would be the United States eventually, they were not united in their opinion. They were divided. It's amazing that they became the United States of America, but the United States has always had differences of opinion, and we always will. But enough people united under the principle that we ought to be free, that we shouldn't pay taxes without representation, that we should govern ourselves, that they gathered and hammered out through much deliberation, arguing, people getting mad, people getting sad, lots of passion, and they hammered out what became known as the Declaration of Independence. Those men did not take that responsibility lightly. They were committed to the cause. I read this years ago, and I've used it in my preaching numerous times. It was written by a graduate of West Point, a 64 graduate by the name of Jack Price, or at least these things were compiled by him. I've looked this up and found it in many forms, but these are the pertinent things that he wrote, and as best I know, they are correct in their facts. He said there were 59 signers of the Declaration of Independence. Many of them suffered greatly for their support of the cause of independence. 5 of those 59 men were captured by the British, tortured, and killed. 12 of them had their homes burned. 2 lost sons in the war. 1 had 2 sons captured. 9 of these men fought and died in the Revolutionary War for independence. They signed the Declaration of Independence knowing full well that the penalty would be death if they were captured. They pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. Now, this is a real pledge because these men, for the most part, were men of means and well-educated. 24 of them were lawyers or judges. 11 of them were wealthy merchants. 9 of them were large farm landowners. One of them, by the name of Carter Braxton, a wealthy Virginia farmer and merchant, saw all of his ships swept from the sea by the British Navy. He sold his home and properties to pay his debts, and he died in rags. Thomas McKeon had to hide from the British almost constantly during the war. He served Congress without pay. His family was kept in hiding. His possessions were taken from him, and his property and poverty was his reward. Thomas Nelson Jr., his home had been taken over by the British commander in Yorktown. Nelson Thomas Nelson Jr. urged General George Washington to open fire on his own home where General Cornwallis was using as his headquarters. His home was destroyed and he died bankrupt. Francis Lewis, his home and properties were destroyed. His wife was jailed and she died shortly thereafter. John Hart was driven from his wife's side as she lay dying. Their 13 children fled for their lives. For more than a year, John Hart lived in the forest and caves, returned to his home to find his wife dead, his children vanished, his home destroyed. He died within weeks of starvation and a broken heart. And the stories of sacrifice go on and on and on. Some of those names on that Declaration of Independence were well-known men, and we know some of their stories. These that I've given you are lesser-known men that we don't read much about in the history books. They suffered horribly because they had a commitment to freedom. They made a dedication to make this land free. I say, thank God they did. Thank God they were committed. I applaud men of commitment. Now, there were men on the other side of this issue that were just as committed. And although I would disagree with them, I applaud them if they were committed. A man that changes sides back and forth willy-nilly, seemingly can't make up his mind, or committed to the side that profits him the most at the moment, that man earns no respect. That man is not dedicated and will never succeed long-term in anything. We applaud men who are committed. These men who signed this Declaration of Independence, Jack Price says they had security, but they valued liberty more than their present security. They stood tall and straight and unwavering, and they pledged for the support of this declaration with firm reliance on the protection of the divine providence. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Oh, what men! What a pledge. Saints of God, have we made a commitment similar to that to our Christ? I'm not talking about devotion to a land, devotion to a system of government, devotion to an economic system, as these men were trying to provide for us. I thank God for it, but I'm not talking about being devoted to that. Some of you are willing to fight for your political persuasion, and you haven't thought about telling somebody about the joy of Christ in years. You'll tell somebody in a moment, how crazy they are for voting for their chosen politician. But have you told anybody how crazy they are for turning their back on Christ and running headlong toward destruction? Oh God, give us hearts of conviction, backbones like timber, Lord, that will not bend with the wind and be persuaded willy-nilly either way. Make us committed to Christ. Saints of God, brothers, sisters, the decision is really ours. We decide what we're going to do. We decide what we're going to believe. My dad is famous in our family for saying, when someone says, well, I just can't do it, he says, people generally do what they want to do. And that's true. We really do. We generally do what we want to do. If that's not a high priority, we're not going to make time for it. And there's nothing wrong with that in your personal life. You don't have to make time for my priorities, my events. You don't have to appreciate them. I'm not going to be offended. That's life. But Christ is eternal life. Let's make our commitment, our dedication sure. Commitment and dedication. And that is my word for Wednesday. God bless you, and I commit to doing my best to seeing you next week.
That is our word for Wednesday. We are so glad that you've spent a few minutes with us today. If you've been touched by today's episode, please share it with your friends and family. We welcome your questions or comments below or by email. You can find the email address in the description, along with a link to mile markers, the website for Boggs Family Ministries. Also, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Thank you again, and we hope to see you next Wednesday.
Ciao for now.